Let's use the filter function now to compare the contents of two multi-column lists to figure out which items are in one list and are not in the other. We went through the introduction of filter function in a previous session, and so now let's see it in action. Let's try it out. So as you'll see here, we have two lists of data. We have our brand name and our format, and our brand name and our format. So let's say we had to figure out which of these items in this full list are in this completed list. Well, actually, let's call this the source list. Okay, so this is the list that we want to make sure that everything in here is already in here. How do we do that? We can use a filter function. So the result will be something like this. List of these are missing, missing, done. So let's delete those and let's start doing that. So filter. As we talked about before, filter is a way to look up one data source in another data source. So in this case, we want to look up this asymmetry and this format in this list and figure out if it's there. So we're going to use filter equals filter. As usual, the tips pop up. We're going to filter this entire range, so I can just arrow over and then hold shift command arrow down to get to the bottom, and then same thing, arrow right to get to the range. So I'm going to filter that range, comma, based on if this column equals the brand name and this column equals the format. And then we'll see it'll come up as an error if it's not there. So as you can see, pretty straightforward filter function. So the power of the filter function is it can do multi-column lists to figure out to match multi-column. So in this case, you have VLOOKUP, which can look up just one criterion. In this case, you can do multiple ones. You can filter, number one, multiple columns. You can do as much data here as you want to. You can filter an entire data set, no matter how many columns it is. And then you compare that to as many criteria as you want. So in this case, we're doing 2, it could be more. So it's a really powerful function that can do a lot of searching, querying, filtering, whatever word you use for it, to find one set of data in another, to confirm that data from one source is in another source. Lots of powerful things that would take you a ton of time if you were doing it by hand, especially if it's a lot of data. It could just take you months. Even for small data sets, if you know how to write a function, maybe it would have taken you 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. If you can write a function, it can probably do it in 20 seconds. So in this case, again, we're filtering this range based on if the brand name matches the brand name, format matches the format. So we see the first one is an error. We're going to copy it down. So the filter range we don't want to change. So we'll make that absolute references. You see it changing right here. And again, we don't want this range to change. We do want this to change because each time we copy the row down, we want that to go to the next row because we want to check each row. So now as we copy this down, I'll command arrow down, go to the right, and then command down to fill down. And there we go. You'll see it's filtering. And I filtered both columns. You know what? I don't need both columns because I'm just checking to make sure it's there. So I'm going to get rid of you see the B, right here, the B. I'm going to make that just A because I only need the first column actually. And I'll copy that down. If the first column comes up as there and not an error, then I know it's there because it's still filtering based on both criteria, even though I'm only filtering one column, right? Still both criteria are still here. So there's the answer. So now if we want to make it a little neater, which we've done this in another course, and we'll go into the if and is error functions, but we can make it if is error this same function. So if it's an error, we'll say missing. Otherwise, we'll say done. So same function, but just basing it on if is error. So it looks a little neater. It's not really vital. Depends on what your purpose is. And if you're showing it to someone, the presentation might matter. But that's it. Then we can obviously sort this list based on that. And then we'll just have all our missing ones in a certain place and all our done ones in a certain place. So one example of the use case of filter, it is a really flexible function that can do a lot of things. Sometimes VLOOKUP is simpler. We'll go into query. Query is a version of filter also that is Definitely more powerful and complicated, but can do some other things. So that's the basics, though, of filter in a certain use case.